Hello everyone, I'm Mario and I am a motion designer. After a long time in the graphic design industry, I've decided that it's about time to share a part of my knowledge and experience as a motion designer. Over the course of the years, I've learned a lot from free resources. For real, like the 70% of what I know is thanks to all the amazing people out there that have shared their expertise with a bunch of strangers like me. And I will be forever grateful with every one of them. Now I feel it's my time to pay this debt back to the community. In this tutorial, I will cover some basic notions of Cinema 4D, like how to move an object, how to rotate it, and how to create your first animation. We will also explore the hierarchy, the interface of the software, and also the notion of frame rate. So, I know this is gonna be a very basic tutorial, but it's just a starting point. In the next few days, I'll publish more of them and we will recreate together some of my latest projects that you can see on my Instagram page, link in the description. So, in order not to repeat myself in the future, I'll try to cover the basic stuff you need to follow the next videos. And one last thing, I'll try to cover and show you as many shortcuts as possible, because I think they are one of the biggest tools to improve your workflow. One incredible thing of Cinema 4D is that you can see the shortcuts for almost every function in the bottom corner of the screen. So, if you find yourself using that command over and over again, take notes of the relative shortcuts. You will save a lot of time. And speaking of save your project. Save it a lot. You don't want to lose it because the software decided to die or to freeze at some random point, right? And so, let's start. Okay, the first thing you need to know in Cinema 4D is how to move in this 3D space. You can do this easily. Hold the one key of your keyboard and press the left click of the mouse. You can move your view. In the same way, with button 2, you can zoom in and out. And number 3 is for rotating the scene. We are now watching our objects from a perspective view. But what if you want to see, for example, your scene from above? It's easy. Just click the scroll button of your mouse and you can navigate in any way you desire. If you want to replace a specific view with another, let's say you don't need the top one, well, just click on camera and select the view you prefer. In this right panel, we can see every object that is currently in our scene. Just a quick tip. Take the habit to rename them, please, because now we have only 3 objects, but believe me, with more complex scenes, it will be a nightmare to understand which object is which if you don't rename them. To do this, just select an object, press the Enter key and rename it. It's an easy step that will save your mental health in the future. By the way, you should start renaming layers also in Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, Premiere, and so on. Organization is one of your best friends. And now, what if you want to hide something? Click on this tiny button with your mouse to cycle the view settings from default in gray, always visible in green, and not visible in red. The top button is related to the viewport, and the bottom one to the final output. This is just a personal habit, but I'm used to click on these icons holding Shift, so I can control both settings at once. Let's move to the next step. Let's say you have this cute little cube in your scene and you want to move it. First, select the object, clicking directly on it or in the Objects panel, it's the same. Now, let's click on the Move tool, shortcut E, and you will see this axis. If you drag them, you can move the object in space according to the specific axis you've selected. You can also click on a random point and move it around, but you won't have so much control, so I suggest you not to follow this way. We can also quantize the movement holding the Shift button. We can do the same thing with rotation, this icon, shortcut R, or with scale, this icon, shortcut T. But what if you want to rotate this cube at a specific degree? It's easy. Once it's selected, let's go to its coordinates. Here, we can insert the exact parameter of our transformation, We can also do math. Let's write 25 times 7. Hit OK. Done. And now it's time to create our first object. Let's select a cube for now. As you can see, a cube will pop up in the workspace center, and if we select it, we will see an extra panel in the right bottom corner of the screen. Here, we can play with the settings. We can also create some subdivision of these faces. We can see them if we go to Display and select Garage Sharing with Lines, shortcut NB, and NA to return to the previous one without lines. The more subdivision your geometry has, the better it will perform in the final render. But for planar surfaces, just keep it low. There's no point in having millions of subdivisions here. A sphere, on the other hand, needs more of them in order to improve its geometry. But keep in mind that the more they are, the slower your render time will be. In order to create other parametric objects, just hold the left key on the cube, and you will see a different selection of new objects in front of you. Each one of them has its own different settings. Go and play with them, it's pretty straightforward, and believe me, it's actually possible to create some stunning composition just with the standard object of Cinema 4D. Let me show you a quick showcase of what I'm talking about. See, everything is made with just the objects you can create in one simple click. These type of objects are called parametric, because their geometry works thanks to specific parameters. But what if we want to have more control? What if we want to create something else? Well, we need a polygon object. For doing this, let's select our cube and press here, shortcut C, and boom. Now it's a polygon object, and this icon has changed. We can still select and transform the object, but now we've unlocked the possibility to do the same for his points, his line, and his faces. Have a look. We can now access a bunch of different kinds of selections to select more points, lines, or surfaces in a most efficient way than just clicking on them. But the one I used most of the times is definitely the loop selection. Shortcut is UL. As suggested by the name, it helps us selecting loops in just one click. For example, let's take this cube and let's do a bunch of different loop selections of its faces. You can add more geometry to your selection with just holding Shift when you're selecting the next one. And of course, now you can have all the control you want on your geometry. What if you want to add more subdivisions to a polygon object? An easy way is to use the Cut tool. So press KL on your keyboard, then click on your polygon object to create more subdivisions in a quick and efficient way. In the Cut tool panel, there are some parameters you can play with in order to create even specific cuts, like multiple or symmetrical. Give it a try. One of the most useful ways to edit polygon objects is definitely using the Extrude tool. Select the cube and press C, and then select 4 faces, pressing Shift to add them to our selection. And press D to enter the Extrude tool. Holding the left click of the mouse, we can extrude the faces we've selected, both inwards and outwards. Let's now select this other face. See, we can now create an extrusion inside the same face we've selected. We can combine those tools, inner extrusion and extrusion, to create more complex polygon objects. One last thing you need to know when dealing with making objects editable is that with some of them, for example the cylinder, the faces will not be connected. Look, if I press C and I try to move one of his caps, it will act strange. To fix this, just click on Point Selection and press Ctrl A. In this way, we've selected all the points of our object. Now, press U, O to optimize the points. In this way, we have created one single object. One important thing we need to know is the role of the axis center of your object. If you want to simplify it, we can say that every movement, rotation or scale is ruled by the axis center. Since in a parametric object we can really edit or do anything of the axis center, let's jump to a polygon cube, it will be easier to explain. Take a look. If we press this icon or the L key, we can now interact with the axis center, but not with the cube. Let's say we want to move it in this direction. Let's press L again, and we are back to the original object. Can you see it now? The axis is in a strange position, and if we rotate the cube, the rotation center is now different from before. So, before doing any transformation, you have to double check that the axis center is in the right position. To reset the axis center, we can use this function. Go to Mesh, Axis Center. Now put everything to 0 to reset it in its standard position. We can also play with the sliders in case we want the axis center to be in a specific part of our object, and use the Auto Update function to see the axis's new position in real time. Just a quick tip, since I never remember the exact path of the axis center, I just use this very useful function of Cinema 4D. Press Shift C on your keyboard and now you can see this menu. Now, if you remember the name of the function you want to use, just digit it. And then boom! You can have access to every tool Cinema 4D has to offer, but of course you have to remember the name. And I use this tool like every time I use Cinema 4D, but for real, like every single time I do work on Cinema 4D I use this tool because it's too handy to have all the tools of the software in just one single menu, and I hope that every software I use in the near future will implement something like that. And yes, Adobe, I'm looking at you. And now, what if we want to move multiple objects at the same time? It's easy, and we can do this in two ways, with the help of a null object. A null object is like an empty object. If you came from After Effects, maybe you already know. But if you're not, that's okay. Let's go to the Parametric Objects tab and create a null object. We can now see an axis center, but nothing else, it's just an empty point. And if we drag and drop all the elements of our scene inside the null object, we have just created a group. Now we can transform every object like they were a single element. We can still control them individually, of course. The other way to create a group is to select the objects and press Alt and G. It's the same result as before, but now the axis center is in the middle of the objects, so pay attention to this. When we create a group like this, we can say that the null object, in this case, is the mother, and the other elements are the children. This hierarchy is generally called parenting. We can create mothers and children in a quicker way. Select an object and insert a new one holding Shift or Alt. With Shift, the new object will be a child. With Alt, a mother. If we hold Ctrl instead, the new element will be in the same position and rotation of the existing one, but without parenting. In the next tutorials, we will go deeper into this hierarchy, but first, let me show you something. Take these green tools. They will work only if they are mothers of other objects. Let me show you an example. In the scene, we have a cloner. If we drag and drop the cube below the cloner, it will work. On the opposite, nothing happens. On the contrary, the blue tools, like the deformers, will work only if they are child of other objects. Now, we're almost ready to create our very first animation inside Cinema 4D. But first, we need to talk about time. In real life, time is a linear dimension. We can subdivide an hour into minutes, minutes into seconds, seconds into milliseconds, and so on. In videos, things are different. Time here is not linear, but is subdivided into frames. If we say that our clip is 5 seconds long with a frame rate of 25 frames per second, we are saying that in every single second of our animation there are 25 frames. A frame is basically a static image, and the entire video is formed by 125 frames. That's it. 25 frames per second is a television standard, but we can also animate in 30, which is also very common. We can also extend to 60 and so on. It's up to your project, to what you want to do or what your client wants. So, before even starting animating, we have to select the frame rate we want for our project. Don't animate before selecting the frame rate, because believe me, if you have an animation and you want to change the frame rate in a second moment, it will be a nightmare to adjust it. Trust me. To do this, go to Edit, Project Settings or Ctrl D, and let's say, for example, we want our video to be 25 frames per second and 2 seconds long. Let's put 25 in here, and in maximum time, 25 times 2. Boom! Now we need to specify the size of our video. It can be Full HD, 4K, a square, and so on. You have no limits here. Go to Edit Render Settings, and in Output, select the size. If you want to create a Full HD video, for example, let's write 1920 by 1080, and set the frame rate to be the same of the frame rate of our scene. Now, in frame range, we can select manual to export just a little sequence of our scene. So for example, we want to export all the frames between 10 and 15 frames. With current frame, we can export just one frame, a static image. We can specify which frame do we want to export, and with all frames, we can export the whole video from the very beginning to the end. We're almost ready to create our very first animation, but we're still missing a camera. I'm using an old project I did some time ago to show you this. It will be much easier to explain. So, let's create a camera in our scene, clicking here. If we zoom back, we can see it. And if we click on this button, we can view through the lens. If we move around in the scene, we're now moving the camera. In its settings, we have a bunch of different options. Let's just focus on focal length for now. With this tool, we can drastically change the way we're looking at the scene. Let me show you some examples. And be careful, because if you have found the perfect view for your scene, you probably want to block it, so you don't move your camera by accident. To do this, select the camera, and then go to Tags, Cinema 4D, Protection. So you can't move the camera if the tag is next to it. You can still exit from the camera and view and move around your scene, but the camera will be safe and protected. If, for any reason, you move the camera by accident, don't press Ctrl Z, because it's useless in this case, but just on your scene. Instead, you have to press Ctrl Shift Z to undo a camera movement. By the way, if you want to know more about what the focal length is and why it's so important, take a look at this video. It's truly amazing and much more technical of what I can say to you. Some last tips that will improve your life quality in Cinema 4D, trust me. Go to Option, Configure or Shift V and click on the View tab. Here we can find a useful function called Tint Borders. With this, we can darken the area that will not be exported in our final animation. Now, let's click on Title and Action Save, and we have some guides that will help us a lot framing our scene. One golden rule for animating is not to make important things of our video to happen in the external borders of these guides. They will not appear in your final render, and if you find them distracting, you can disable them, of course. Now it's time to animate. So, what can we actually animate in Cinema 4D? Well, almost everything. Let's select the cube. Do you see these icons? Let's click to the one corresponding to the Z-axis. You've just inserted a keyframe. Now, move your mouse to the end of the timeline, change the Z-axis value, and click again on the icon to confirm the transformation. This is the second keyframe. Now, let's go back to the beginning of our timeline with this button and press the play icon. And that's it, we have animated our cube. Now, let's go to the top sheet here. Shortcut Shift and F3. In this viewport, we can see every keyframe of our scene, and we can navigate it with holding the 1 key for moving and zooming holding the 2 key. Here, we can move the keyframes in your timeline, or you can delete them. If I change the position of the keyframes, our animation will act in total different ways. Take a look at some examples. Now let's go to the curve mode. Here we can see this curve. It controls the acceleration of our animation. And if you came from After Effects, this works like the value graph. Nothing more, nothing less. It's just the same tool. But if for you this is the first time you see this tool, don't worry. Let's take a moment to understand how it works. In a simple way, we can say that the more the curve is horizontal, the more our animation will be slow. A full horizontal curve is basically a static object. On the opposite side, making it vertical, our animation will increase its acceleration. Let me show you with some examples how different curves can make our scene to look completely different. If you want the animation to have a linear velocity, so without any kind of acceleration, click this button. Instead, to reset the standard curve, click here. Grow familiarity with this graph editor, please, because this is the place where the real magic happens. And take your time to make the curve as perfect as possible. Spend hours, no problem. It will make the true difference between a so-so animation and a top-notch masterpiece. And bear in mind that wherever you see this icon, you can animate the relative property. And Cinema 4D has this very icon on almost every tool. And that's it for this tutorial. I know, we've covered a lot of stuff, and at the same time, we didn't really go deep into any of them. Take this video as a quick starter to some basic notions of this software, an essential knowledge of how to move your first step in this world. Now it's up to you. Go into Cinema 4D and experiment, press buttons, move stuff, get inspiration on Behance, Instagram, YouTube, most of all, make mistakes, like a lot of mistakes. This is the best way to improve your motion game. In the next tutorials, we will recreate together some of my recent animations, so hit like and subscribe to stay updated on future contents. Follow me on my Instagram, link in the description. Write your feedbacks on this tutorial or leave any questions you want in the comments below. So see you in the next video. Goodbye.